finally the day where I answer this frequently asked question. As you can tell by the title of this video, today I'm going to tell you or give you some advice on how to write spoken word poetry. I get asked this pretty much every single day, so I'm hoping that this answers all your questions and you take everything you need from it. I've thought about this a lot and I've come up with the best advice I can, so let's get into it. So the most common misconception, or where people go wrong in my opinion, is that they focus too much on technicality. They focus too much on the rhyming pattern or the structure of the poem and how long the line should be and, I don't know, the flow of it and how many beats per syllable, all of that technicality stuff. And I don't think that matters. That's not the best way to approach writing spoken word poetry, in my opinion. When people ask me questions about advice on spoken word poetry, it seems like they're more focused on trying to make the poem great rather than what they're actually talking about, which is not the best angle to go about it. You shouldn't be even thinking about the impact the poem is going to have. You should just be focusing on the writing, the basic minimum of, what am I going to talk about? I've never gone into writing a spoken word where I've thought about technicalities. In fact, I never think about technicalities and the lines and the structure. I've just never thought of it like that. For me, poetry is just a natural release. So when I'm writing a poetry, I just type. Whatever comes into my head, I just type it out. And then it'll naturally come up with its flow. So I never go into it overthinking about all that stuff because it's just so unnecessary. You're just going to overthink it so much that it's not going to be natural. It's going to be pre-thought and it's going to be, I don't know, it just feels like work then. And for me, poetry shouldn't ever feel like work. That's probably why I'll never write a story, because I feel like writing a story would take too much work and effort and you have to think about it. Whereas poetry to me is just lots of stuff in my brain just put onto paper. But that's my approach to it. And I think that's, in my opinion, the best approach to it is just think of it as like a natural release. What are you feeling? And just put that onto paper. To be honest, I don't know any of the technicalities of poetry. I haven't studied poetry, so I couldn't tell you all of that. So if you're looking for that kind of information, probably not the right video for you. I would suggest you find a professional poet who can give you that kind of advice. I'm just going to tell you what I do. My only goal when I write is, am I clearly expressing the message I want to portray? That's the bottom line. At the end of the day, when I'm writing, I don't care about being fancy or using big words or coming across really intellectual or having this big profound meaning. All I care about is the message I'm trying to convey. Does that come across? Are people able to read my poem one way through and know exactly what I'm trying to get at? That's the bottom line to me. That's all I care about. And I think that's the best way to approach it is, I have this message that I want to share with people. How easily or accessible can I make that through the power of words? That sounded so intense. The power of words. It's a poem. It's few words jumbled together in a line in a couple of verses. It's very basic. So now, the general advice aside, what are the steps to writing spoken word poetry? Step number 1, being inspired. In my opinion, 90% of the work isn't even about the words. It's about the inspiration behind the poetry. When I'm writing spoken word poetry, 90% of the work comes from, what am I going to talk about? How did this poem come about? What was the inspiration behind it? What made me want to talk about what I talk about? Once you have that, the rest flows very naturally. And I think when people are asking me, I want to write poetry but I don't know how to start, it's because they haven't done the research. They haven't been inspired by anything. The best way to start writing spoken word poetry is by going out there and listening to conversations or watching a movie and picking up on little things that you feel like, oh, that's interesting, I want to talk about that. Reading a book. Art is the biggest source of inspiration. For me personally, I watch a lot of interviews, just because since I was little I've always watched interviews. It's how I became obsessed with Ellen DeGeneres. I just like listening to people talk and understanding their thought patterns and stuff. So I watch a lot of interviews. I'm not very good at small talk. So when I talk to my friends, I tend to talk a lot and I get really deep and I like to talk about I don't know, deeper topics. And sometimes I'm inspired by the conversations we have. Sometimes I watch a movie and it really hits home and I'm like, I want to capture that feeling in that scene in poetry. So I'd say if you're stuck on how to write spoken word poetry, go out there and just experience stuff. At the end of the day, if you're not experiencing things, if you're not watching things, you're going to find it hard to write spoken word poetry. I think people's perception of writing spoken word poetry is you put a blank paper in front of you and then you just automatically write. In my eyes, that is a very hard way of going about it. If you want to write spoken word poetry, you need to have something to write about. It seems very common sense, but I feel like people don't appreciate that enough. Find something that you're really passionate about. What is one thing that you really want to get across? And whatever that thing is, do as much research as you can on it. And if it's about a poem that, like a personal experience you're feeling, try to understand exactly what it is that you're feeling. Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling upset? Why are you feeling upset? What's causing it? Try and understand exactly what you're feeling as much as you can. The biggest part of writing spoken word poetry is the inspiration behind it. That is the most important part, in my opinion. If you don't do that, you're going to find it really hard writing spoken word poetry. Once you have the inspiration behind your poem, you now need to look into the tone of your poem. You've got a topic, great. How are you going to portray that? What's the mood of the poem? What's the tone of it? Is it a happy poem? Is it a sad poem? Is it a motivational poem? Is it about personal experience? Is it about trying to educate people? What's the angle you're going for? Because what you need to be very sure from the start what your angle is, because that tone is going to go throughout your whole poem. And if you start off not knowing what the tone is and you just go straight into writing, throughout the process it might shift and people will lose focus. They won't know what this poem's about. Is it meant to be motivational? Is it meant to be just a sad personal experience? Like, what am I supposed to feel from this? So if you're really sure from the start what tone you're going for with this spoken word poem, it'll just make your life a lot easier when you're writing it. For example, if you're writing a sad poem, you're going to talk about sad topics, you're going to use sad language, the way you perform it is going to be quite melodramatic. On the other hand, if you're doing a motivational poem, you're going to use a lot more strong language, motivational words, and it's going to be more impactful and powerful. So yeah, the tone definitely plays a huge part in how you write your poem. The third part is write, but write honestly. I cannot stress this enough. Lots of people, when they message me, it sounds already from the message, I can tell that they're overthinking it. Honest truth, when I wrote my first poem, I didn't even know that I was writing poetry. I just wrote what was in my brain and I just wrote it out. This is how I feel. It was like word vomit. I didn't think about whether it was going to be impactful, whether it was going to be inspiring, whether it was going to convey this big message. I didn't think about any of that. All I thought was, this is what I'm feeling right now, and I just put it onto paper. And that's, I think, is the best approach to have. You should never go into writing spoken word poetry with a thought of like, oh, this is going to be, I want to create something great. I want to create something that's really impactful. Because how do you know? How do you know if people are going to react? How can you possibly know how people are going to react to something? You don't. The only thing you can do on your part is make sure that the poem is as true and authentic to how you're feeling. That's all you can do. And then the rest is whatever happens, happens. Just do what feels natural to you. People have different writing styles. If your writing style isn't like the person who you're inspired by, that doesn't matter, because you're doing what feels right to you. It doesn't have to have a set rhyming pattern. It doesn't have to have a set structure. It doesn't have to make sense all the time. It's just whatever you feel, you feel. At the end of the day, the aim here is to connect with people. And I feel like the best way people connect to poetry is through honesty. People can tell when you're being honest and authentic and when you're not. So if you want people to connect with you, just be honest. And the last part is performance. Now this is specifically for people who do intend on performing, because it is spoken word poetry. If it's just poetry, then just follow everything else. A big part of spoken word poetry is performing it. How do you perform it? And again, this goes back to all the other previous steps of, what is the tone? If it's a happy poem, you're going to perform in a very happy way. If it's a sad poem, you're going to probably be like me and just cry. I cry way too much. I need to like sort that out. But if it's a motivational poem, you're going to be much more impactful. In my opinion, performance is 50% of portraying your poem. The words is 50% and the performance is 50%. And you put them together and that's your spoken word poetry right there. Obviously, everyone has their own style in performing, but I would advise try not to be too preachy, just because I find that a massive turn off. I don't like it when I'm watching poetry and it sounds like they're being too preachy. At the end of the day, I think the best way to approach it is don't talk at your audience, but talk to your audience. At the end of the day, there is no right or wrong way in writing spoken word poetry. You may have watched this video and disagreed with a lot of things I've said, and that's completely fine. This is just my opinion and how I approach it. Another tip is do what feels right to you. A lot of people fall into a trap of, you know, they've seen spoken word poetry and they've seen this poet and they're really inspired by them. But what happens when they go to write their own work? They're basically imitating that person. You can be inspired by spoken word poetry artists, but avoid imitating and copying, because, you know, what are you achieving from that anyway? It's important to have your own style and stick to what feels right to you. And that's really it. That is all there is to writing spoken word poetry. Yeah, as long as you're passionate and you have this drive to write and you're inspired by something, go for it. Hopefully this video has answered all your questions about how to go about writing spoken word poetry. That's pretty much all I could think of in terms of advice. Also, let me know what other kind of tips and advice videos you would like in the comment section below. Just to let you guys know, I do have a second channel called Click for More Taz. It's my vlogging channel, and I'll leave a link to that in the description below. My name is also Click for Taz on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook, Snapchat, and I'm Click for Taz for all of them. It cut off right at the end. I also have a Patreon page, so you can support me through there. I'll leave that in the description below. And other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you guys next time. Bye!